Cool, so thank you. We have Alex, Sarah and Lucy all very physically distanced, so hopefully we can capture them all on the camera. Cool. So we're just going to get you to present on the establishing partnerships and governance for Te Tārakia Tāwhiri and Auckland's climate plan, and I know Lucy will be going through part of the 10-year budget discussion as well, but although we won't be making decisions specifically on that today, but there'll be a bit more of an update for members of the committee. So I hope you're all back from your 8-minute break. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, malo lele. Thanks, Chair. As Councillor Hills said, we just want to do a couple of things today. If we click on to the next slide, thanks, Suad. Two key things focused around the implementation of Te Tārakia Tāwhiri Auckland's climate plan. As Richard said, Lucy Hawcroft to my left, who some of you may know from other worlds, is going to give an update on the climate action and 10-year budget, so the work that we've been doing around that. And then Sarah to my right is going to, the substantial part of today is really getting insight onto the governance and regional partnerships that we're proposing to set up. You'll all hopefully be pretty familiar with this slide. We've brought this to you before, where we've highlighted that the bit to the left has been the focus of our activity up until July in terms of finalising Te Tārakia Tāwhiri and the implementation side. We now move to the right-hand side of this graphic, where we're thinking about council's contributions, so very much the stuff that Lucy will talk to around the long-term plan. Just a reminder that we were directed by the Environment and Community Committee in 2019 to put together detailed costed actions for Auckland Council's contribution to climate action. So that's very much what we're talking about. But there's also an opportunity to do stuff still, even thinking about the LTP into the future. So those immediate actions, obviously a lot of it focuses on advocating, partnering, leveraging with other partners, hence bringing to you today a governance and partnership structure, which Sarah will talk to. With that, I'll just hand straight over to Lucy to give that quick overview.
Thanks for that, Alex. So I'll just keep this update quite brief, but as you're aware, we've been looking at developing some costed proposals for the next long-term plan, and to do that, we started off. So the first thing we started off with was looking at the plan overall and the many actions in the plan and thinking about what our contribution to that could be. And so we've broken that up into essentially 3 buckets. And so the first bucket is the base case. So that's the many actions that Council has underway that are already planned and funded that are having a positive impact on climate outcomes, so supporting reducing our emissions or preparing us for climate change impacts. The second bucket is the actions that we can progress outside the long-term plan. So we identified over 100 actions that we can do that respond to climate change that don't require additional staff or additional funding. And as Alec mentioned, quite a few of the actions in that bucket are things like advocacy, partnering with others to bring about change, looking at how we can alter our internal processes. And then the final bucket is what we want to take forward to the long-term plan for your consideration. And I guess it's important to remember that when we talk about the long-term plan, we're focusing on the proposed projects that need a funding decision, but it needs to be considered in the wider context of Council's response. And of course, there is also, significant work streams within Auckland Transport, water care, and other areas considering how we respond to climate change. And so why do we need a climate lane? So we do have a lot of good work underway. Some of it is specifically driven by climate change. Other is areas where we, potentially have been investing for a long time, things like public transport and stormwater management, which are not necessarily driven by climate change, but have beneficial outcomes. But to meet our goals, we need to do more. And so that's why we've gone through the process of coming up with some detailed costed programs and evaluating them. And so we've put the programs through a really quite extensive ranking and prioritisation process. We've started off with 38 program proposals, and we've considered their potential impact on reducing emissions, how they would support adaptation and build resilience, Māori outcomes. That's been a really important factor for us, and we've also been doing a lot of work with the Mana Whenua Kaitiaki Forum on that. Impacts on equity and other social environmental co-benefits, and also some aspects of the program in terms of would it be easy or complex to implement. And so what we've come up with is some different options that we will be discussing with you more on the 23rd of September. And so after that workshop, we'll be looking to refine the options based on your feedback. And there is also scope for some further engagement before the mayoral proposal will be released and the decisions on consultation items made.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm going to talk a bit about the governance and regional partnerships, which is the bulk of the report that you have today. Obviously, as we know, we cannot deliver the climate goals of Te Tauaki Tāwhiti, the climate plan, in isolation. We need to work very much in partnership across sectors and across the region. And so what we're proposing is to set up a structure providing commitment and oversight of delivery of the plan, and also to enable and unlock greater collaboration in its delivery. I should point out, obviously, for a range of programmes, as you've heard about, there's a lot that we already do and governance structures already exist for, so this wouldn't seek to duplicate that work. But it does set in place 3 additional groups beyond those that already exist within Council. Within Council, that's the political reference group, which I'll talk about in a second, and then on a regional basis, we'll be talking about establishing a leadership group with representation from council family, mana whenua, government, business, community, DHBs and youth. In addition, as we've talked about within Te Tauaki Tāwhiti, the climate plan itself, we talk about establishing a rangatahi rōpū as well, and so that is the 3rd group that we'll be talking about today. So if we go to the next one. So, as you'll have seen within the paper, we're proposing a climate political reference group with purposes to oversee implementation of Te Tauaki Tāwhiti, the climate plan, provides an opportunity for feedback on key regional and national issues, and doing that in an agile way, as we know this is quite a fast-moving area with things changing quite rapidly. Providing guidance and direction as appropriate on key issues, barriers and opportunities, and also really reflecting strong feedback we've had from the outset of developing the plan and through the consultation, a real appetite for the ability for increased public input, check and challenge on delivery of the plan, and also an opportunity for mana whenua and councillors to discuss issues, share information and build capability. And this draws on examples of other groups that are established within council already and really reflects a lot of the feedback that we've had. So as you'll see within the paper, we focused our options analysis on 3 main areas. The first being breadth of representation, the second being timeliness and agility, and the third being that opportunity for public input and enabling that more fully. So the recommended option is the political reference group, and we're proposing that that would meet every 2 to 3 months, or by exception as needed. For public and community group representatives to be invited to attend on an annual or biannual sessions as agreed by the group, to enable that opportunity to talk directly to councillors and check and challenge implementation. And then representatives from each of Auckland's 19 iwi authorities to also be invited to attend. The representation we'd be seeking on the group is 6 councillors, 6 local board members, a member of IMSB, and also mana whenua representation. So that's the political reference group that we talk to within the paper. Obviously, there's the regional implementation of the plan. As we know, councils levers are part of the implementation of the plan but cannot deliver the goals in isolation. And so this regional approach needs to focus on operational delivery, leadership and influence being a core part of why we need to establish these partnerships, and also better enabling that independent review that people have fed back they would like to see more of. So if we go to the next one. So the regional leadership group that we're proposing would include council group, mana whenua, government, business, communities, DHBs and youth. And the reasoning behind this is to deliver the plan, we really need leadership from across sectors. We need people who are champions and those most able to influence, collaborate and unlock barriers within their areas. We're proposing that this group would communicate widely and regularly, raising the profile of climate actions, implications and opportunities. We would propose that this group would meet 3 times a year formally, primarily for direction setting, and then obviously monitoring progress as we go through and an annual review and check and challenge. We obviously know that there would need to be initial setup and capacity building needed for this group, in particular around the evidence and principles that underpin our approach within Te Taraki Tāwhiri and get everybody setting the same direction. So when it comes to establishing a group like this, we know we're not starting from scratch. We know there's a really strong appetite to work together and collaborate on climate action. For instance, through consulting on the framework, we had responses, and quite detailed responses, from around 80 organisations, representing large businesses and networks through to community groups and youth networks as well. And I thought one of the kind of quotes that really distilled a lot of the feedback we had is that just so much more can be achieved through collaboration and partnership, and council are well placed to work across industries and facilitate those partnerships. And the images across the bottom are just really highlighting we've been working collaboratively from the outset of development of this plan. So a lot of these connections exist, and a lot of feedback we've had on the plan to date has been very much how do we work together on implementing this going forward. So for the next slide, and just again, really to highlight, this is at the forefront of businesses' minds. When you look at Sustainable Business Council, the Business Network and the Green Building Council, it really is front and centre. Climate action is a priority for these networks and groups. So again, we're not travelling this path alone, and there are opportunities to collaborate more. So, and then on to the third group, which is the Rangatahi Rōpū. As we've spoken about before at committee, we've had great engagement from rangatahi, and over 100 rangatahi provided their voice and input into development of Te Taraki Tāwhiri, the climate plan. A top priority that rangatahi identified was the establishment of a Rangatahi Rōpū to act as a channel, create a movement, and also review and feedback on the progress of the plan. That group is currently in review as to membership and coordination with the Kaitiaki Forum. So on the recommendation side, this is a high level of the recommendations that are in the paper, but obviously you have the more detailed recommendations in front of you.
Awesome, thank you all. Fairly straightforward. I don't have any questions yet, but do we, Councillor, Deputy Chair, Pipakoon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the presentation and keeping the pressure on with this work. I just have a question about, in terms of the leadership groups and the wider support that we're seeking to implement Auckland's plan, and really important that we're partnering as much as we can. What does that mean in terms of, say, our membership for groups like Sustainable Business Network? Are we in the current fiscal constraints able to continue those memberships where we're actually still relying very much on that network and the support they're giving and the work they're doing? And I guess I'm asking that question because I'd like to know that we can actually, as Auckland Council, ensure that we maintain the memberships of those strategic groups that we're actually asking a lot of.
Kia ora, Councillor. I think that's critical in terms of playing that role, supporting those networks, the SBCs, the SBNs, and so on. There have been financial pressures. We have found budget to do that this financial year, but we need to make sure that's an ongoing commitment to all those, particularly those local groups, because, as you said, you know, this is about Auckland's climate plan, and they have a significant role in delivering and a significant voice in supporting as well. So, we do. And hopefully we can continue.
That's good to know for this year at least. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Coombe. And before I continue with questions, I have In the political reference group, we've increased that to 6 rather than 5 that was in the agenda. Local boards would like a wider regional spread, so they've got 6. That Councillor Walker has shown a interest, Councillor Collins and Councillor Henderson also. There's one other member that anyone can put themselves forward, so just keep that in mind as we go to the recommendations. But the questions are Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alec and Lucy and Sarah. 2 questions really. One, first of all, focusing on the leadership group. You've got down here that this is going to drive the delivery of climate programs in the respective sectors. I'm kind of curious about how this group's going to work. How big is it? You say that, and I think it is the key to it, that you attract leaders, but you also retain leaders, so they've got to feel that it's worth their time. But how do you get this group to drive rather than just be a discussion group? First question.
I think it's a great question. I think Sarah touched upon it in her slides in terms. I actually, for many organisations, it's not going to be necessarily an issue. We already have seen that appetite through a national level through the Climate Leaders Coalition. So the big businesses, I feel, are there and are really ready and ramping to go. For us, it will be the small and medium-sized enterprise where a lot of this is a little bit more difficult. And for that, I kind of, and again, this is a bit of a discussion in terms of, do we use a group like the SBN that Pippa talked to, which has a strong representation in that small, medium-sized enterprise group versus the SBCs who are much larger. So I think that's one of the critical things about that competition. How do we get them to really push forward? I feel like, and I've had a lot of discussions with, my peers, but also those groups to say actually they have really, and one of the slides kind of showed that there's a whole bunch of organisations who have seen what we've put out in the climate plan and have seen that as a really strong impetus for them or a target for them. And what we've set out in the climate plan to say, well, if we're going to halve our emissions by 2030, these are the sectors that we need to reduce by X amount, and these are the industries that need to do that. So actually, I feel like the plan in and of itself has actually given some direction to people. So these are the areas we need to focus on. I don't know if Sarah wanted to add to that in terms of keeping that momentum, particularly, I suppose, in the context of COVID and what we're seeing now.
I think you covered most, but I think I can add a little. I think we'd seek for that group not to be huge in the first instance. It would need to be quite focused. So we wouldn't anticipate 50 people. We would probably look for around 12 to 20. And also just really targeting it effectively in who are the people who represent networks and have that coordination that already exists. So if you've got those people who already can drive activity. I think what's been good in development of the plan as well is the new evidence, the new knowledge, the new principles that have been developed, which actually are useful for a number of wider organisations in what they do as well. So a key part of that building capacity, I think, would be of value for those members more broadly. But as you say, we need to keep building momentum and maintaining interest as we go forward. But we'll target it as we go.
Thank you. That's helpful. It's because those groups can just degenerate into a discussion rather than a force to drive, and that will be a big challenge. The second group that I'm interested in, and there's not much said about it in this paper, is action owners and partnerships. Now, I don't know whether you're talking about dealing with a group here that's representative or dealing just with the individual businesses. But obviously this group's critical because they're the ones that are creating the emissions and they're the ones that have got the levers to reduce them that we have to persuade. And I just would like it if you could spell out what shape this group is taking and how you'd interact with them and how you'd manage to persuade them to do what we would like to see them to do.
Yeah, in the schematic, it's not overly clear. The action owners and partnerships represents where we have actions within Te Tauraki Tāwhiti, the climate plan. So where we have those specific actions, for a number of them, partnerships already exist. So think about coastal management plans, for example. There are action owners and partnerships that already exist. So that's true for some, but not all necessarily at this stage. So this represents where we've got specific climate plan actions and the partnerships that need to exist around those specifically.
Sorry, I'm still trying to get my head around. Is this a group you're setting up, or is it the actions that come from the other groups.
Yeah, it's not. That's not an additional group being set up. That's for individual actions being delivered on the ground individually, but just making sure that learnings from those feed through.
Okay, and so that's clarified that aspect. But in terms of, this is how do you persuade, other than through regulation, people to do what we need them to do in order to reduce their emissions? I mean, what are the mechanisms that you're looking at using here? Because in the end, that's what partnership's about. It's us not being able to do more than deal with our own particular area, but persuading other people to act in the common and the long-term good when it may have an economic cost and a disbenefit to them. So I'm just kind of interested in how we get, if I use New Zealand Steel as an example, that would probably be one of the hardest examples. Although they've now downsized, so maybe they'll be doing less and emitting less.
If I just jump in there, I mean, that's a really good question, but it's not just a question that we need to resolve, and it's a question in my past life, sitting in the business space and others who've done the same thing. That's a continual question, and for me, it's a question of frame of reference. When we go to a business and they say, look, we have financial implications for the now that we need to deal with, that's correct. But actually, if we don't address climate change, those issues are going to come through in terms of innovating or lack of innovation and kind of external factors in terms of global markets and so on, meaning that actually that transition to a low emissions economy, either we have that imposed upon us as business, and I'm talking as a business, or we actually innovate and we make that change now. And that's just a discussion that needs to happen. We can add some of that, and as Sarah said, we have a whole bunch of evidence in terms of the risk to Auckland if we don't do this, the disruption that we'll see in terms of supply chains and so on, and we can provide that. I mean, it's all publicly available, and that adds to my counterparts who sit in the New Zealand Steels or sit in the different organisations to go, well, this is how you communicate to your decision makers and your boards and your executives to actually say, well, we all need to make this change. So I feel like we have a role there, but we can't necessarily make that argument to every single business, if that makes sense. We can just arm our other people sitting in the same seat, but talking to their organisational leadership.
And sorry, last of the supplementaries is, how do you, obviously what we can do is one thing, doing it in partnership with central government to create that persuasion. I mean, it is carrot and stick. It is, we'd like you to do this now, but by the way, if you don't do it, we're probably going to have to regulate for it. So it's better that you control how it's done than be forced to do it in another way if you don't do anything. How are you linking in that section with central government so that you've got the combined pressure of central and local government pushing in a particular direction?
Great point again. In terms of how we're working with that, we've had discussions with MFE, obviously specifically, looking after climate change and so on, but also, and we'll talk a little bit later about the MB consultation that's come through, actually responding to that, yes, but working with them on how can we improve it, what are the Auckland specific contexts. Obviously, MOT and NZTA, I know there's a huge amount of work going on from my counterparts in transport strategy and with AT and so on. I mean, that is really important, and what we can do and what we've kind of set out in the plan is here are our key points of advocacy, here are the big things that we want to see come through, and I think providing that in terms of briefings to incoming governments and so on, and then the direct conversation with the policymakers, that's a key part of what we're saying in terms of advocacy and leverage, and not just waiting for the next consultation to come along.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the team. My question is around the business representation. I know you talk about the Sustainable Business Council and so forth, but Auckland's business is really around the movement of goods and services, and it's really about construction. So would you include people like EMA, the Employee Manufacturers Association, the Construction Industry Association, the Road Transport Association, who have collective authority over their industries, collective representation? They could pass words around, give you feedback on the realities, and also transfer some of council's thought pieces back to their individual players.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for that. And that's a great point. I guess the key thing that we talked about just earlier is how we make this manageable, so we don't have a cast of thousands, so we can actually drive that action. But I think those are all really important groups that, at least if not directly there, that we're having that feedback with them. So I think we can take that on board in terms of what that final composition of the leadership group is. Whether it is all of those or representative of those, I think that's a really good point, because construction and infrastructure obviously are a really big part of also kind of council's direct interaction with business as well. So I think great points, Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I think if you really want to have an impact, you're going to have to talk not just to the converted, but to those who actually have real influence and aren't maybe on the same rail like at the moment as councillors.
Definitely. I think we've seen with what was the AT plan, the grouping we had in February, March? We had Heb and Fletcher and a few others involved with that, which was, I can't
remember. It feels so long ago.
Yeah, but they are, keenly already involved in, especially in the zero waste and climate space. So I think getting some of those for their learnings through that AT process. What was it?
That was X-Labs, Sarah.
X-Labs, yes. Yeah, X-Labs.
There is a better memory than
that was a bit of that sharing how, to really change the construction zero waste space, and also how they're changing things to electric and everything. I was really surprised to see the breadth and diversity of businesses involved with that conversation. So I think getting some of those back into the group as well to help other similar organisations thrive in those areas on really clear examples of how that it's not maybe as hard as some may think it is, or that information sharing. The Councillor Henderson, I see you said you're happy, and I did note the other day when you asked me to be on the panel. So as a starter, I put your name in there. Yes, but if you have a question,
I do not. But great job.
Thank you, Councillor Walker.
Sure, I've got a few questions and comments. I'm just looking at the chart on page 18, which on the face of it looks pretty complicated. And when I start asking myself questions, even just around the amount of time that would be occupied in interaction between these various groups, it's going to be extensive. So I've got a few suggestions, and it goes back to the America's Cup notion around making the boat go faster. So does it reduce emissions faster and more? And frankly, if there's stuff around participation and interaction that's not cutting it, then we should take it out. I think a concern that I've got is that this looks fine, but we need to actually test it. So, for example, if we look at particular areas around electric vehicles and a number of things, we need specific roadmaps in different areas that are identifying the blocks and the way forward and how we can get momentum and make things happen quickly. And certainly my experience is that the people that you want involved are the doers, the businesses that have got a financial stake, that want stuff to happen, the individuals that are prepared to put in the time and the commitment, not just somebody that's sitting around to tick a box, frankly, which is too often the case. There'll be instances where a particular group will form conceivably just on a temporary basis, and once they've done their job and they've put it on the table, we'll generally find that people will move on. So there needs to be quite a bit of fluidity. The other comment that I'd make, and I know I've raised it before, Mr. Chair, is there are other cities, particularly smaller cities, that are way ahead of us around this. And our membership of organisations like ICLEI help to foster that. So some of these groupings and involvements can be virtual in the sense that we can partner up with people from overseas cities. They don't also need to be Auckland centric. They can be people from outside Auckland, and we need to look at relationships with other cities in New Zealand around this. So I see the situation as being quite fluid and really a learning by doing and testing. And just as an aside, if I look at the need for roadmaps and groups associated with the drought we've got in Auckland right now, I just don't see it happening. So I've helped to bring together the exterior cleaning industry and help to promote best practice around that. And there are other industries. So there are testing grounds where we could and should be doing stuff now, and the leadership is not there, that is related to climate change because around water and energy and the like, there are huge savings to be made. So I'm just tossing in some thoughts, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'm saying is let's not lock us down into something that may not be as workable as it appears.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. But I think there's a balance again. I think you've said that there are maybe too many groups, but also want us to add groups, and I think that's the difficulty in this. But I guess Alec or Sarah, if you want to describe how that the momentum can continue. These are like chicken challenges, and also the more networking and building the power, I guess, across the city, as opposed to slowing things down. Well, that's what I feel like you've given me anyway, but if you just want to confirm.
Yeah, if I'd make two comments. One, I think, Councillor Walker, your analogy of the boat is a really good analogy. The other thing to lay on there is we need to make sure the right people are on the boat as well, and I think that's a key part of this, is to make sure that we have that forward motion, which Mayor Goff and Deputy Mayor have talked about. The other thing just to note is, yes, we obviously do need to be learning and doing, and so we've built into the whole plan, not just this part, about we need to continuously review and look at how well this is working, because climate change and a whole myriad of other factors are changing so quickly that we need to make sure that happens. And the final bit is just in terms of some of those specific action, and obviously the technical expertise that we're getting from groups like C40 and so on will be focused on those specific issues. So I think that action ownership, that level that sits about the, how do we deliver on those specific actions that we've identified, of course we want to make sure the right technical expertise comes through those groups.
Perfect, thank you. Was there anything else, Councillor Walker?
Just ready to indicate that it needs to be really fluid, so you don't get bogged down, because we're running out of time fast.
We sure are. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I've got two questions. First is one to Lucy. Lucy, you had a slide earlier on and it said we are also doing things that push us further away from our climate goals. I want to ask you, who is going to be the climate police and make sure that we stop doing those things?
So
could you give me an example of one of those things as well?
So a small example might be that we are still sometimes building facilities where we're putting in gas boilers rather than heat pumps. So I guess that's an example of, where we're locking in a piece of infrastructure that in the future we will probably need to replace. So it's things like that, and thinking about the whole of life costs of assets and also the environmental impacts. And that's actually sort of one of the proposals we'll be talking to you about through the long-term plan. I guess in answer to your question about the climate police, so part of the long-term plan structure is that there will be a climate lens that looks across all the activity areas and the lanes. And so the aim of that is to help us identify areas where we might need to change our direction or, alter our processes slightly. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Alec?
I'd welcome a office change of title for the Chief Climate Police Office Unit. Would be great. But yeah, look, I think there is a role for us as the Chief Sustainability Office to give the advice. I think you guys obviously hold, the decision-making power, so I think there's a role there. I guess there is no one person or group that needs to do this. I think we all do need to challenge some of our assumptions that we've had in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing things.
Second question goes back to the same table that Councillor Walker was mentioning, and I just want to say thank you for including the demographic advisory panels. They have identified climate change, transport and housing as their three main issues, and we really want to encourage fertilisation across all the panels. So thank you very much for your paragraph 43 in your report.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question and some comments. So the first question is around the budget. It says there's money there for this year, but then there was a comment from one of our officers around the fact that we've got to have to secure more money for this in the long-term plan. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. I'm just really mindful of one of our earlier presenters talking about getting the basics done, like our water quality first. So that's just something to be thinking about for me. My comments are, look, I'm really uncomfortable with having 5 blokes and 1 woman put forward. We've got the ethnic diversity there, but we've got 1 woman, and I would really like to think that Councillor Coombe could be part of that. She's Deputy of Planning as well, which is critical. So I don't know how you're going to work that out, but it's not a good look. So there's that. You can sort that out, Mr. Chairman. And
Councillor Cooper. Yeah, sorry. Councillor Bartley and Councillor Coombe are in the C as it stands.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. Yes, good.
Yeah.
So she is there as deputy. I don't know why I keep getting Pippa mixed up with planning. No, that's right. Good. All right. Sorry, my mistake then.
No, that's fine. And it was just the people who'd shown interest first and trying to get that regional spread, but definitely anyone can attend the political advisory group meeting as well.
The other comment is around business being involved, because we know that often business are doing better than councillors on climate change actions because it directly affects their bottom line. So I support the comments of the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Walker on that it's no good getting the think tank people on there. We need the people that are doing. I think that's critical and also if you want to be influencing businesses who are going to be critical in making these changes for Auckland, they need to be in the tent, not outside. That's all I had to say.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Definitely, and it is both of that. Of the Climate Leaders Coalition, especially, that the team has been working alongside, is about 110 businesses, everyone from ASB to Air New Zealand to Fletcher to Heb to quite significant construction companies down to the warehouse and others. So there's quite a diverse range that they'll be tapping into. Alex, you just want to maybe give confidence to all members of the committee that you'll be talking to a broad range of people.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify, and I can't remember, and I can't read it in the paper, but I know we talked about it in workshop, that leadership group is about the people, the groups that will bring others with them, versus and as we talked about, the action ownership and actually delivering on some of that technical stuff, which is separate from that. How do we actually get this momentum, get others in? And 100% agree, Councillor Cooper, there are a myriad of companies out there doing really great stuff. So let's actually work to showcase that and show some of those other groups, which the Deputy Mayor talked about, who may not completely be on board right now. We're not the best people. Like, Council's not necessarily the best people to make that argument. It's actually their peers and their peer organisations that are taking that leadership stance. So I can just say I agree, Councillor Cooper, that leadership group needs to be the people or the groups that will be heard and that can bring people together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we are, part of that Climate Leaders Coalition as well. So with the ports and, there's everyone from banks to Fonterra, Z Energy, Spark. So some of the big players, but also many small businesses as well. So I think if we can continue to make sure we get diverse range, Alec, that would be perfect. Question from Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair, and just bear with me while I'm going to scroll up and down my nexus to the different pages. I was looking at page 18 as well, and it's big, isn't it? And my questions were around the political reference group, and so what you're saying, if in point 21, it says, because of the fast evolving nature of climate change and the need for rapid and sustained climate action, a more agile response mechanism is necessary. And it talks about our workshops for environment and climate change not being able to meet that demand for the fast evolving nature of climate change and the decisions and direction that needs to be given. And I just question that, because if we go back to what the Mayor was saying about what's our sphere of influence really, and is it about regulation and legislation, because that's not fast moving by any stretch, and that is a governance role, the advocacy. And the political reference group might do some of that, but what else? Is it going to be responding to the information that you're bringing back to it and giving you direction? And so where does that leave the rest of the councillors? How does that feedback mechanism work to everyone else that isn't on this committee? And are we really moving so slow as a committee that we need a political reference group as well to keep this at pace? That's my first question.
Kia ora, Councillor Dalton. Just to answer one of your first points, yes, in terms of feeding back to the committee, that is definitely something that we'd look to do in terms of what comes through reference group, what the discussion is, and also then bringing it back to committee. Some of those elements, and one of the reasons why it's not necessarily a workshop and a committee meeting, is that they might not be political decisions. Hence, and some of our steer as officers is that those workshops need to be associated with a committee item which requires a decision. So hence the kind of pulling it out to one side. And I think that probably touches upon your second point about speed and pace. There is a whole heap of stuff that we would love to talk to you all about. You have a myriad of other things on your plate, and so we're trying to just streamline that process. I don't know if Sarah wanted to add anything there.
No, I think that covers most of it. Obviously, the reference group wouldn't be a decision-making group. Any key decisions would obviously still come to committee, and the reference group also enables that broader representation to reflect the feedback that we'd had through the consultation. So that's why we're looking at the reference group as well, to enable that mana whenua representation and public input.
Definitely, Councillor Dalton, that's one of my concerns, and at first I wasn't too in favour of a political advisory group, because it does, in its existence, kind of look like it's removing access to information and ideas from members of the committee. That's not what I'm keen to do. I want everyone to feel they're invited to those. It's more of a chicken challenge, come up with ideas, the discussions with interested and passionate local board members that can be there, but I do not want this to be a place where it is another thing that the members of the committee are not engaged with, and I'm sure Alec will protect that. But I guess maybe you want to go through a little bit of what you're wanting to bring to that. Would it be, and how often?
I think what we're proposing was for the group to meet maybe every 2 to 3 months, in recognition that obviously committee meets every couple of months, so it enables more meetings and more updates. I realise I also didn't say that we would also look to circulate any minutes and agendas to committee as a whole, so that people could see everything that comes through that group. But it's more where things come through, some discussions which wouldn't be decisions, and other more ad hoc discussions, such as consultations and various things that are coming through that we might need to be able to have a discussion about, but isn't necessarily a full decision. And obviously, as we implement the plan, as new things are happening all of the time, new relationships are made and new actions are taken forward, it enables us to have more frequent discussion.
Can I have another question or comment?
Absolutely.
Chair. Yeah, so I guess my position is it's another It's another meeting, and I'm not saying it's not going to be a great, rich meeting. It'll be rich with discussion, and the risk is coming back to committee and relitigating the whole thing again with the other councillors who haven't been involved in the discussions. And I look at the cost and your long-term plan projections for this committee, which I think is on page 20, I can't remember, and that you've got two other points through the report talking about an investment that you're going to be coming back to, a climate change investment or climate action investment that you're bringing back to the committee at the end of September, I think. So the cost that you've got here, I think you said that the committee can come within existing budgets for 2021, and then you've got some amounts for the long-term plan. So this is specifically for this political working group, and that is specifically for the costs that are in that table. But have you had a look at actually what are the full costs of all of that, the new political working group?
Just to respond, Councillor Dalton, the costs on the table are about the leadership group, not the political reference group. So obviously there's, as Sarah talked to on the slides, in terms of getting, particularly if we're finding leaders, as we've talked about before, in business or other sectors who aren't necessarily experts in climate change, because that might actually be the better representatives to actually drive that collective action. So that point 90 on the report isn't about the climate, the political reference group. Those are costs that are one of those programs that we're hoping to bring to the LTP workshop.
All right, so would we be able to get the costs of the political working group, because there will be some, please? Thank you.
We can come back to you on that, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Councillor.
Chair. Thank you. I looked at that page 18, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, doesn't it? And there's a huge commitment from governing body members who are going to participate in it, which I admire. But it's another big piece of work that needs to come back to workshops, I hope, and committees for environment anyway. Thank you.
Yes, definitely, and I think we've discussed it before on our own, Councillor Dalton, that we don't just want more talking committees, it's more about doing and how we can connect it all up. And I'm happy for a review, after one or two meetings, if it's better just to have the whole committee, I'd prefer that. I think it's just about how we involve local boards and mana whenua in a different way, but I'm happy to continue that discussion on how we bring all those people around the table without it being 50 people in a room, I guess, is the challenge always on these things. But thank you, really good points.
Thank you.
Member Wilcox.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose my concern with all these political working groups, having been on the waste management and the weed one, is often what we want isn't what we get when we put it up to the bigger committee. And so that's the first thing. But I want to take this matter from the aspect of tikanga, and within this it's a comment and then come the questions. And so the tikanga is the iwi set the kawa, the hapu managed the tikanga, and the marae implemented. So when we accepted the taruke o tawhiri, we basically accepted that was the kawa that would be carried through, and this committee now and the Auckland Council as a whole had a responsibility to report back to iwi and back to those who presented that taruke o tawhiri as to how we're implementing it, how we're maintaining the enforcement and the compliance with it, and all of that kaupapa. So I suppose what I'm asking here is that in Auckland we've said there's mana whenua and mātā waka, but actually we've always said within the statutory board our statute is to both, and so we like to talk about whatever's good for Māori is good for Auckland. So one of the things that we have been kind of thrashing around, and I suppose it's how are we going to get Mata Waka involvement in this process and within this group of the political reference group? That's the first question. Thank you.
Kia ora, Member Wilcox. Yeah, it's a really good point. Sorry, I'm just hearing myself, I think. And we'll definitely take direction and advice, any advice that the IMSB can provide in terms of other groups. Just to note that we have been engaging broadly with Māori in terms of preparing the plan to Tārakia Tāwhiri. Obviously, as we've talked about many times before, in terms of direct engagement with the Kaitiaki Forum and with iwi chairs as well. But some of that consultation feedback, you'll recall, involved actually those Mātāwaka groups leading the discussions through their various marae, and how we involve them in this leadership group or political reference group. We would have that discussion with the Kaitiaki Forum, and IMSB can provide us with any particular groups that they want us to talk to more directly as well.
So my next question then comes back a little bit further, is that now that we're going to have this political working group, how will this working group report back to the larger committee? And what is, I'm always scared of the child wagging the dog, the tail wagging the dog, and vice versa. So, and I think this has been put forward also by other councillors as well.
Thanks, Member Wilcox. Yeah, as we canvassed earlier, this isn't a decision-making group. So if there are decisions to be made, that will be brought back to the full committee. However, we will also, as Sarah said, circulate the information that we're providing and talking through, and any minutes and whatnot coming through from those meetings to the whole committee. So there will be an ability for all members to see what discussions are happening. And as I said, any decisions will need to come back to committee, because this is not a decision-making body.
So my final question is, will other members of the committee be able to attend, even in just an observer or a monitoring position?
Yep, I think that's fine.
Yeah, we are interested in having public organisations, community organisations, mana whenua, anyone. So that would definitely include interested local board members and councillors who can, and other members of the IMSB, to attend. It's more about ensuring we have a core that will turn up to discuss the information, like with all the political reference groups, but everyone's invited, just like they are to any of the smaller committees that we have, to ask questions, to discuss things. It's just to have a representative group so that it's in your diaries, and yes, that sort of thing.
Chair, then can I just ask the question then? So would that also apply to mana whenua or Mātāwaka groups that wish to attend and gave forward notice?
Yeah, I think we've set that out in the paper in terms of specifically, yes, every 6 months there's actually an opportunity for people to come and present to that group and provide those feedback. So at least that component there.
Thank you, Chair. You see the H there, Chair. So.
And thank you, Member Wilcox. We also have H just for members of the committee who might be wondering what that was. That was a suggestion from IMSB that we just ensure there's a report back on the exact process to get members involved in the partnership and governance approach from the mana whenua side, and that's both through the mana whenua Kaitiaki Forum, but also through individual iwi who would like the one-on-one engagement rather than going through the mana whenua Kaitiaki Forum. So, and plus the Mātāwaka groups that we have contact with. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect and get everyone, but there are mana whenua who prefer to go through the forum, and there are other iwi chairs who prefer to be discussing one-on-one, and we want to continue to get that right. And yes, so any other questions? I think we've exhausted that. Seems pretty good. And I'll just check with, I was just messaging Councillor Dalton, but I think you're fine about that, Councillor Dalton?
Yep, good, thank you.
Cool, thank you. Cool, so I will move and have a seconder. Happy to, Deputy Chair, Pippa Coombe. Oh, no. Cool. Cool, so you've read through the resolutions. Did anyone want me to read out that H, or you can all see it on your screens? It just says, report back to the Environment and Climate Change Committee on the process of engagement and input of Māori on the partnership and governance for Te Tarakia Tawhiri, including their selection and participation in the groups prior to finalising the details of the partnership and governance approach. That was just the only one change from the agenda. So all those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you very much. Thank you, team. Cool. Have a nice day. Right. We will just, Alec, would you be able to just, we're just going to get some sanitation for our next speakers on that table. Thank you.